Buenas tardes, queridos amigos. Domingo en Buenos Aires. Disculpen mi atuendo. eh, lo que pasa es que es domingo en Buenos Aires. The Midnight Library, the Mad Haig, the Peppermint Tea. 10 minutes later, she was sitting on her own with her brother in something called the VIP Business Lounge, which was just a small airless room with some chairs and a table offering a selection of the day's newspapers. A couple of middle aged men in suits were typing things into laptops. A couple of middle aged men in suits were typing things into laptops. By this point, she had worked out that her brother was her manager, and that he'd been her manager for 7 years since she'd given up professional swimming. Are you okay about all this? Her brother asked, having just got 2 drinks from the coffee machine. He tore a sachet, or sachet, I don't know, to release a tea bag. Peppermint. He placed it into the cup of hot water he'd taken from the coffee machine. Then he handed it to Nora. She had never drunk peppermint tea in her life. That's for me? Well, yeah, it was the only herbal they had. He had a coffee for himself that Nora secretly craved. Maybe in this life she didn't drink caffeine. Are you okay about all this? Okay about what? Nora wondered. The talk today. Yeah, how long is it? Again? 40 minutes. Sure. It's a lot of money. I upped it from 10. That's very good of you. Well, I still get my 20%. Hardly a sacrifice. Nora tried to think about Nora tried to think how she could unlock their shared history, how she could find out why, in this life, they were sitting together and getting along. It might have been money, but her brother never had been particularly money motivated. And yes, sure, he'd obviously been upset when Nora walked away from the deal with the record company, but that had been because he wanted to play guitar in the labyrinth for the rest of his life and be a rock star. After dipping it a few times, Nora let the tea bag free in the water. Do you ever think of how our lives could have been different? Like if I had never stuck with swimming? Not really. I mean, what do you think you'd be doing if you weren't my manager? I manage other people too. Well, yeah, of course I know that, obviously. I suppose I probably wouldn't be managing anyone without you. I mean, you were the first, and you introduced me to Kai, and then Natalie, and then Ellie, so she nodded, as if she had any idea who Kai and Natalie and Ellie were. True, but maybe you'd have found some other way. Who knows? Or maybe I'd still be in Manchester. I don't know. Manchester? Yeah, you remember how much I loved it up there at uni. It had really. Sorry. Oh, that's light. It was really hard not to look surprised at any of this, at the fact that this brother was getting on with and working with was also someone who went to university. In her root life, her brother did A levels and applied to go to Manchester to do history, but he never got the grades he needed, probably because he was too busy getting stoned with Ravi every night, and then decided he didn't want to to uni at all. They chatted a bit more. At one point, he became distracted by his phone. Nora noticed his screensaver was of a radiant, handsome, smiling man she had never seen before. She noticed her brother's wedding ring and feigned a neutral expression. So, how's married life? Joe smiled. It was a genuinely happy smile. She hadn't seen him smile like that for years. In her root life, Joe had always been unlucky in love. Although she had known her brother was gay since she was a teenager, he hadn't officially come out until he was 22, and he'd never had a happy or long term relationship. She felt guilt that her life had the power to shape her brother's life in such meaningful ways. Voy a cerrar la puerta. No, porque generalmente abro la puerta para que el gato salga y veo que el gato está acá, entonces digo, ¿para qué, no? Porque hay ruido y todo. Oh no, you know, Ewan, 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 Ewan se escribe, no sé. Nora smiled back as if she knew who Ewan was and exactly what he was like. Yeah, he's great. I'm so happy for you both. He laughed. We've been married 5 years now. You were talking as if me and him have just got together. No, I'm just, I sometimes think that you're lucky, so in love and happy. He wants a dog, he smiled. That's our current debate. I mean, I wouldn't mind a dog, but I'd want a rescue, and I wouldn't want a bloody multi-poo or a bitchin or bitin. I'd want a wolf, a proper dog. Nora thought of Voltaire. Animals are good company. Yeah, you still want a dog? I do, or a cat. Cats are too disobedient, he said, sounding like the brother she remembered. Dogs know their place. Disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient must be slaves. He looked perplexed. Where did that come from? Is that a quote? Yeah, Henry David Thoreau. My fave philosopher. Since when were you into philosophy? Of course, in this life she'd never have done a philosophy degree. While her root self had been reading the works of Thoreau or Lao Tzu and Sartre and Stinky Student Flat in Bristol, her current self had been standing on Olympic podiums in Beijing. Weirdly, she felt just as sad for the version of her who had never fallen in love with the simple beauty of Thoreau's Walden or with the stoical meditations of Marcus Aurelius as she had felt sympathy for the version of her who never fulfilled her Olympic potential. Oh, I don't know. I just came across some of his stuff on the internet. Ah, cool. We'll check him out. You could drop some of that into your speech. Nora felt herself go pale. I'm thinking of maybe doing something a little different today. I might improvise a little. Improvising was, after all, a skill she'd been practicing. I saw this great documentary about Greenland the other night. Made me remember when you were obsessed with the Arctic and you cut out all those pictures of polar bears and stuff. Yeah, Mrs. Elm said the best way to be an Arctic explorer was to be a glaciologist. So that's what I wanted to be. Mrs. Elm, he whispered. That rings a bell. School librarian. That was it. You used to live in that library, didn't you? Pretty much. Just think, if you hadn't stuck with swimming, you'd be in Greenland right now. Svalbard, she said. Sorry. It's a Norwegian archipelago. Busqué esta palabra tantas veces. Lo que pasa es que ¿quién usa la palabra archipiélago? Archipelago, algo así. Way up in the Arctic Ocean. Okay, nowhere then. You'd be there. Maybe I'd be still in Bedford, moping around, unemployed, struggling to pay rent. Don't be daft. You'd have always done something big. She smiled at her elder brother's innocence. In some lives, me and you might not even get on. Nonsense. I hope so. Joe seemed a bit uncomfortable and clearly wanted to change the topic. Hey, guess who I saw the other day? Nora shrugged, hoping it was going to be someone she'd heard of. Ravi, do you remember Ravi? She thought of Ravi telling her off in the newsagents only yesterday. Oh yeah, Ravi. Well, I bumped into him. In Bedford? God, no. I haven't been there for years. No, it was at Blackfriars Station. Totally random, like I haven't seen him in over a decade at least. He wanted to go to the pub, so I explained I was teetotal now. And then I got into having to explain I'd been an alcoholic, and all of that. And I hadn't had a glass of wine or a puff or a joint in years. Nora nodded as if this wasn't a bombshell. Since I got into a mess after Mom died, I think he was like, who is this guy? But he was fine. He was cool. He was working as a cameraman now. Still doing some music on the side, not rock stuff, DJing apparently. Remember that band me and him had years ago, The Labyrinth? It was becoming easier to fake vagueness. Oh yeah, The Labyrinth. Of course, that's a blast from the past. Yeah, got the sense he pines for those days. Even though we were crap and I couldn't sing. What about you? Do you ever think about what could have been if the Labyrinth had made it big? He laughed, a little sadly. I don't know if anything could have been. Maybe you needed an extra person. I used to play those keyboards Mom and Dad got you. Did you? When did you have time for that? A life without music, a life without reading the books she loved. But also a life where she got on with her brother, a life where she hadn't had to let him down. Anyway, Ravi wanted to say hi and wanted a catch up. He only works on tube stop away. He only works one tube stop away. So he's going to try and come to the talk. What? Oh, that's I wish he wouldn't. Why? I just never really liked him. Joe frowned. Really? I can't remember you saying that. He's okay. A good guy. Bit of a waster, maybe. Back in the day. But he seems to have got his act together a bit. Nora was unsettled. Joe? Yeah. You know when Mom died? Yeah. Where was I? What do you mean? Are you okay today, sis? Are the new tablets working? Tablets? She tucked in her bag and started to rummage. Saw a small box of antidepressants in her bag. Her heart sunk. I just wanted to know, did I see much of Mom before she died? Joe frowned. He was still the same Joe. Still unable to read his sister. Still wanted to escape reality. You know you weren't there. It happened so fast. She didn't tell us how ill she was. To protect us. Or maybe because she didn't want us to tell her to stop drinking. Drinking? Mom was drinking? Joe's worry increased. Sis, have you got amnesia? She was on a bottle of gin every day since Nadia came onto the scene. Yeah, of course I remember. Plus, you had the European Championships coming up. She didn't want to interfere with that. Jesus. I should have been there. One of us should have been there, Joe. We both. His expression frosted suddenly. You were never that close to Mom. Were you? Why this sudden? I got closer to her. I mean, I would have. You're freaking me out. You're acting not quite yourself. Nora nodded. Yeah, yes, I think you're right. I think it's just the tablets. She remembered her mother in her final months saying, I don't know what I would have done without you. She'd probably said it to Joe too, but in this life she'd had neither of them. Then Priya, whatever, arrived into the room, grinning, clutching her phone and some kind of clipboard. It's time, she said. Otro capítulo. The tree that is our life. 5 minutes later, Nora was back in the hotel's vast conference room. At least 1,000 people were watching the first speaker conclude her presentation. The author of Zero to Hero, the book Dan had beside his bed in another life. But Nora wasn't really listening as she sat in her reserved seat in the front row. She was too upset about her mother, too nervous about the speech, so she just picked up the odd word or phrase that floated into her mind like croutons in minestrone. Little known fact, ambition. What you may be surprised to hear is that if you can do it, hard knocks. Esta entre comillas, parece que fueran cosas que ella está escuchando que dice el tipo este. It was hard to breathe in this room. It smelled of musky perfume and new carpet. She tried to stay calm. Leaning into her brother, she whispered, I don't think I can do this. What? I think I'm having a panic attack. He looked at her, smiling, but with a toughness in his eyes she remembered from a different life when she'd had a panic attack before one of their early gigs with the Labyrinth at a pub in Bedford. You'll be fine. I don't know if I can do this. I've gone blank. You're overthinking it. I have anxiety. I have no other type of thinking available. Come on, don't let us down. Don't let us down. But she tried to think of music. Thinking of music had always calmed her down. A tune came to her. She was slightly embarrassed, even within herself, to realize the song in her head was Beautiful Sky, a happy, hopeful song that she hadn't sung in a long time. The sky grows dark, the black over blue, yet the stars still dare to shine for. But then the person Nora was sitting next to, a smartly dressed businesswoman in her 50s, and the source of the musky perfume smell, leaned in and whispered, I'm so sorry about what happened to you, the stuff in Portugal. What stuff? The woman's reply was drowned out as the audience erupted into applause at that moment. What? She asked again. But it was too late. Nora was being beckoned towards the stage, and her brother was elbowing her. Her brother's voice billowing almost. They want you. Off you go. She headed tentatively towards the lectern on the stage, towards her own huge face smiling out triumphantly, golden medal around her neck projected on the screen behind her. She had always hated being watched. Hello, she said nervously into the microphone. It is very nice to be here today. 1,000 or so faces stared, waiting. She had never spoken to so many people simultaneously. Even when she had been in the Labyrinth, they had never played a gig for more than 100 people, and back then she kept the talking between the songs as minimal as possible. Working at string theory, although she was perfectly okay talking to customers, she rarely spoke up in staff meetings, even though there had never been more than 5 people in the room. Back at university, while Izzy always breezed through presentations, Nora would worry about them for weeks in advance. Joe and Rory were staring at her with baffled expressions. The Nora she had seen in the TED Talk was not this Nora, and she doubted she could ever become that person, not without having done all that she had done. Hello, my name is Nora Seed. She hadn't meant it to be funny, but the whole room laughed at this. There had clearly been no need to introduce herself. Life is so strange, she said, how we live it all at once in a straight line. But really that's not the whole picture, because life isn't simply made of the things we do, but the things we don't do. And every moment of our life is a kind of turning, still nothing. Think about it. Think about how we start off, and this set thing, like the seed of a tree planted in the ground, and then we grow, and at first we are a trunk, absolutely nothing. But then the tree that is our life, develops branches. And think of all those branches departing from the trunk at different heights, and think of all those branches branching off again, heading in often opposing directions. Think of those branches becoming other branches, and those becoming twigs. And think of the end of each of those twigs, all in different places, having started from the same one. Life is like that, but on a bigger scale. New branches are formed every second of every day. And from our perspective, from everyone's perspective, it feels like a continuum. Each twig has traveled only one journey, but there are still other twigs. And there are also other todays, other lives that would have been different if you'd taken different directions earlier in your life. This is a tree of life. Lots of religions and mythologies have talked about the tree of life. It's there in Buddhism, Judaism, and Christianity. Lots of philosophers and writers have talked about tree metaphors too. For Sylvia Plath, existence was a fig tree, and each possible life she could live, the happily married one, the successful poet one, was the sweet juicy fig, but she couldn't get to taste the sweet juicy figs, and so they just wrote it right in front of her. It can drive you insane thinking of all the other lives we don't live. For instance, in most of my lives, I am not standing at this podium talking to you about success. In most lives, I am not an Olympic gold medalist. She remembered something Mrs. Elm had told her in the Midnight Library. You see, doing one thing differently is very often the same as doing everything differently. Actions can't be reversed within a lifetime, however much we try. People were listening now. They clearly needed a Mrs. Elm in their lives. The only way to learn is to live. And she went on in this manner for another 20 minutes, remembering as much as possible of what Mrs. Elm had told her, and then she looked down at her hands, glowing white from the light of the lectern. As she absorbed the sight of a raised, thin pink line of flesh, she knew the scar was self-inflicted, and it put her off her flow, or rather, put her into a new one. And the thing is, what we consider to be the most successful route for us to take actually isn't, because too often our view of success is about some external bullshit idea of achievement, an Olympic medal, the ideal husband, a good salary, and we have all these metrics that we try and reach, when really success isn't something you measure, and life isn't a race you can win. It's all bollocks, actually. The audience definitely looked uncomfortable now. Clearly, this was not the speech they were expecting. She scanned the crowd and saw a single face smiling up at her. It took a second, given the fact that she was smartly dressed in a blue cotton shirt and with hair far shorter than it was in his Bedford life, for her to realize it was Ravi. This Ravi looked friendly, but she couldn't shake the knowledge of the other Ravi, the one who had stormed out of the newsagents, sulking about not being able to afford a magazine and blaming her for it. You see, I know that you were expecting my TED Talk on the path to success. But the truth is that success is a delusion. It's all a delusion. I mean, yes, there are things we can overcome. For instance, I am someone who gets stage fright, and yet here I am on a stage. Look at me on a stage. And someone told me recently, they told me that my problem isn't actually stage fright, my problem is life fright. And you know what? They're fucking right, because life is frightening, and it is frightening for a reason, and the reason is that it doesn't matter which branch of life we get to live, we are always the same rotten tree. I want it to be many things in my life, all kinds of things. But if your life is rotten, it will be rotten no matter what you do. The damp rots the whole useless thing. Joe was desperately slicing his hand in the air around his neck, making a cut-it gesture. Anyway, just be kind and just be kind. I have a feeling I am about to go, so I would just like to say I love my brother Joe, I love you brother, and I love everyone in this room, and it was very nice to be here. And the moment she had said it, it was nice to be there, was also the moment she wasn't there at all. Próximo capítulo, System Error. She arrived back in the Midnight Library. This time she was a little away from the bookshelves. This was the loosely defined office area she had glimpsed earlier. In one of the broader corridors, the desk was covered with administrative trays barely containing scattered piles of papers and boxes, and the computer. The computer was a really old-fashioned looking cream-colored boxy one on the desk by the papers, the kind that Mrs. Elm would once have had in her school library. She was at the keyboard now, typing with urgency, staring at the monitor as Nora stood behind her. The lights above, the same bare light bulbs hanging down from wires, were flickering wildly. My dad was alive because of me, but he'd also had an affair, and my mom died earlier, and I got on with my brother because I had never let him down, but he always But he was still the same brother, really. He was only really okay with me in that life because I was helping him make money, and it wasn't the Olympic dream I imagined. It was the same me. And something had happened in Portugal. I probably tried to kill myself or something. Are there any other lives at all, or is it just the furnishings that change? But Mrs. Elm wasn't listening. Nora noticed something on the desk, an old plastic orange fountain pen, the exact same kind that Nora had once owned at school. Hello, Mrs. Elm, can you hear me? Something was wrong. The librarian's face was tightened with worry. She read from the screen to herself. System error. Mrs. Elm, hello? You who? Can you see me? She tapped her shoulder. That seemed to do it. Mrs. Elm's face broke out in massive relief as she turned away from the computer. Oh, Nora, you got here? Were you expecting me not to? Did you think that life would be the did you think that life would be the one I wanted to live? She shook her head without really moving it. It was if that was possible. No, it's not that. It's just that it looked fragile. What looked fragile? The transfer. Transfer from the book to here. The life you chose to here. It seems there is a problem with the whole system. Something beyond my immediate control, something external. You mean in my actual life? She stared back at the screen. Yes, you see, the Midnight Library only exists because you do, in your root life. So I'm dying? Mrs. Elm looked exasperated. It's a possibility, that is to say, it's a possibility that we are reaching the end of possibility. Nora thought of how good it had felt swimming in the pool, how vital and alive. And then something happened inside her, a strange feeling, a pull in her stomach, a physical shift, a change in her. The idea of death suddenly troubled her. At the same time, the lights At that same time, the lights stopped flickering overhead and shone brightly. Mrs. Elm clapped her hands as she absorbed new information on the computer screen. Oh, it's back. That's good. The glitch is gone. We're running again. Thanks, I believe, to you. What? Well, the computer says the root cause within the host has been temporarily fixed. And you are the root cause. You are the host, she smiled. Nora blinked. And when she opened her eyes, both she and Mrs. Elm were standing in a different part of the library, between stacks of bookshelves again, standing stiffly, awkwardly, facing each other. Right, now settle, said Mrs. Elm before releasing a deep and meaningful exhale. She was clearly talking to herself. My mom died on different dates in different lives. I'd like a life where she's still here. Does that exist? Mrs. Elm's attention switched to Nora. Maybe it does. Great. But you can't get there. Why not? Because this library is about your decisions. There was no choice you could have made that led to her being alive beyond yesterday. I'm sorry. A light bulb flickered above Nora's head, but the rest of the library stayed as it was. You need to think about something else, Nora. What was good about that last life? Nora nodded. Swimming. I liked swimming, but I don't think I was happy in that life. I don't know if I am truly happy in any life. Is happiness the aim? I don't know. I suppose I want my life to mean something. I want to do something good. You once wanted to be a glaciologist, Mrs. Elm appeared to remember. Yeah, you used to talk about it. You said you were interested in the Arctic, so I suggested you become a glaciologist. I remember. I liked the sound of it straight away. My mom and dad never liked the idea, though. Why? I don't really know. They encouraged swimming. Well, Dad did, and anything that involved academic work, they were funny about. Nora felt a deep sadness down in her stomach. From her arrival into life, she was considered by her parents in a different way to her brother. Other than swimming, Joe was the one expected to pursue things, she told Mrs. Elm. My mom put me off anything that could take me away, and like Dad, She seemed even push me to swim. She didn't even push me to swim. But surely there must be a life where I didn't listen to my mom and where I am now, an Arctic researcher, far away from everything, with a purpose, helping the planet, researching the impact of climate change on the front line. So you want me to find that life for you? Nora sighed. She still had no idea what she wanted, but at least the Arctic Circle would be different. All right, yes.